a 4-week series on Jonah. Last week, Rich kicked us off. Story goes, if we don't know it yet, Jonah was asked by God to go to a place called Nineveh. Jonah said no, and he went in a different direction to a place called Tarshish. He disobeyed God's calling. If you want to catch up, listen back to Rich's talk. I won't go into too much detail. He says it better than I. This week, we're looking at Jonah 2. And where I want to begin is actually with a Harvard commencement speech. J.K. Rowling, who was the author of the famous series Harry Potter, said this in her commencement speech: "I had failed on an epic scale. An exceptionally short-lived marriage had imploded, and I was jobless, a lone parent, and as poor as it is possible to be in modern Britain without being homeless. Failure meant a stripping away of the essential, the inessential. I stopped pretending to myself that I was anything other than what I was, and began to direct all my energy into finishing the only work that mattered to me." She had failed on epic proportions. And we know that feeling too. We know what it is to fail. Maybe not quite the same crisis, but we all know those moments when we realize that what we've built our life upon is actually the buoyancy aid of self-sufficiency. And it begins to sink, and we with it, lower and lower and lower into the depths. And that journey is similar to the one that Jonah is on, away from God's calling to Nineveh and towards this place of his self-sufficiency that's called Tarshish. And it's a journey down. So if you read the scriptures, if you read Jonah, you'll notice this idea, this theme of going down being repeated over and over. Down to Joppa, down into the ship, down into the inner hold of the ship, and then down into the sea, and then down into the belly of a whale, and then down into the realm of the dead. He's at the depths of his despair. And we know that journey too. It might not look like going down to Joppa, wherever the heck Joppa is. But it might look like avoiding a conversation that we know God's calling us to have. We choose silence because it's easier right now. And that is a downward journey that leads us into bitterness, into passive aggression, into relational distance. For some of us, it's choosing comfort over calling, actually. That we avoid serving, we avoid the calling to be generous, we avoid being obedient to God, and we avoid community. And it's a downward journey that leads to stagnation, cynicism, loss of purpose. Maybe it's actually hiding a small compromise. Maybe for you, it's actually a tiny lie. It's a browser history that's been deleted. It's a purchase you can't justify. And it's a downward journey that leads to secrecy, to anxiety, and to living a double life. And these are all our moments of these Tarshish moments where we run away from the calling of God towards our own sense of self-sufficiency. But it's a downward journey that leads inevitably to death and decay. It leads to desperation. It leads to the depths of despair. We are Jonah in the story. And so the question we need to wrestle with this morning, that I hope I can provide some sort of hopeful answer to my depressing introduction, is how do the depths of our despair become the location of our deliverance? How is that possible? How does that happen? There was once a lady called Corrie ten Boom. Corrie lived in a concentration camp. She went there with her father and with her sister. And they both sadly died, but Corrie was able to be liberated. And after being in the concentration camps, she went and preached the gospel. And she tells a story in a book called The Hiding Place. I'm just going to read it to you, so listen in. And there's a slide at the end as I come to the conclusion of this excerpt. She writes this. Introduction to this. She's preaching at a church in Munich, and she comes face to face with a guard that she last saw in the concentration camp. She writes this. It was at a church service in Munich that I saw him, the former SS man who had stood guard at the shower room door in the processing centre at Ravensbrück. He was the first of our actual jailers, and I've not seen him since that time. And suddenly it was all there. The room full of mocking men, the heaps of clothing, Betsy, my sister's pain-blanched face. And he came up to me as the church was emptying, and she'd just preached on forgiveness. And he came beaming to her and bowing. He said, "How grateful I am for your message, Fraulein. To think that, as you say, he has washed my sins away." And his hand was thrust out to shake mine, she writes. And I, who had preached so often to people the need to forgive, kept my hand at my side. And even as the angry, vengeful thoughts boiled through me, I saw the sin of them. Jesus Christ had died for this man. Was I going to ask for more? Lord Jesus, I prayed, forgive me and help me to forgive him. I tried to smile. I struggled to raise my hand. I could not. I felt nothing, not the slightest spark of warmth or charity. And so again, I breathed the silent prayer. Jesus, I cannot forgive him. Give your forgiveness. And I took his hand, and as I did, an incredible thing took place. The current started in my shoulder, raced down my arm, sprang into the joined hands, and then this healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being. This healing warmth seemed to flood my whole being. Corrie ten Boom, in that moment, got a grip of grace. And in turn, grace got a grip of her. And what I want to suggest this morning is that the ways in which the depths of our despair become the location of our deliverance is when we get a grip of grace and we allow grace to get a grip of us. So what is grace? In his book, Knowing God, J.I. Packer argues that there are three foundational truths that we must understand to get a grip of grace. The first is this: we are sinners. We are sinners. A few years ago, Melissa's at the back, so she might testify to this story later on, but it was before we had kids. We went to the Forest of Dean. Anyone been to the Forest of Dean? There's lots of forests in the Forest of Dean. Can't remember which car park we went to, but there's one of those, you go to it and there's these trails that you follow, right? And it's like, you can do this route and this route. We weren't avid walkers, like our footwear was not appropriate. So we chose the easiest route. It was the white one, and it was a circular one. So we were following these post markers on the path. And it came to the point where the post markers ended, but we hadn't returned back to where we started. So me, being the man that I was like, well, let's just follow our nose. Like, we'll just continue this way. We don't need markers, thank you very much. We don't need instructions. It's this way. Now, long story short, you can see where this is going. What should have been a 45-minute jaunt, about what are we saying, Liz? 2.5 hours? Longer. The moment I realised, personally, I was really lost. But to Liz, I was like, no, it's this way, it's this way. The moment I realised was when I saw on the floor, and I thought it was, and I got it confirmed by a friend of mine who knows the Forest Dean very well, on the floor was a fresh poo from what was a wild boar. So I'm thinking we're really lost. And I finally came to my senses and realised that there's no way that we can go any further without me admitting the reality of the location that we were in. Lost. We were lost. Like Jonah, we're people who run, we hide, and we choose Tarshish over Nineveh. But the first thing about gripping grace is the reality that we are sinners. We are lost. We have to come to terms with that reality quickly, sooner rather than later, before you and I are faced with a wild boar in the depths of our despair. And if you don't believe me, Paul writes this in Romans. He says this, he says, for everyone has sinned. Not some, not those people from that particular postcode, not those people who vote for that particular political party, not those people from that completely different country. We all, everyone has sinned. And we all fall short. Even the vicar falls short. Even I fall short. Right? Even the people we look up to and put on pedestals and we think they're better Christians than I, they fall short of God's glorious standard. And Jonah, it took the belly of a fish to get him to realize this, but he came to terms with his reality and recognized that as a sinner, he deserved nothing other than what was due a sinner, condemnation. He writes this, you hurled me into the depths, into the heart of the seas, in the currents swelled around me. All your waves and breakers swept upon me. You held me in, God. Like, this is what I deserve. I'm a sinner. And like Jonah, we deserve nothing other than condemnation. And then until we stop pretending that's the truth, we cannot begin to get a grip of grace. Until we own the fact that you and I are sinners, grace cannot be gripped. But not only that, we are sinners who are completely incapable of saving ourselves. I used to work at the safari park in the West Midlands. Who's been there? Right. Has anyone been to the firework display? Okay. If you've never been there, right, it was a nightmare to get your car out of the field. My job in my high-vis tabard was to walk around and help cars get out of the mud. Has anyone got their car stuck in the mud before? You know this experience, right? Clive's like, yes. You know this experience. If you've ever got your car stuck in the mud, the temptation is just to put first gear, full throttle. Like, I'm going to get myself out of this thing. I'm stranded. I'm in the mud. Now, what happens when we do that, when we try and save our car ourselves, is that we get actually this thick layer of mud around the tyre, so it loses traction, and then we actually dig the hole deeper. So we make things worse. And so our job was to go around and find those people who had made things worse and to try and help them out. Our best efforts to save ourselves out of the depths of the despair that we're in only dig the depths deeper. We need help. We need help. Psychologists have this term for this belief that once I achieve this thing, I'll finally be okay. It's this idea called the arrival fallacy. If I just get that promotion, if I just get that fitness goal, if I just reach that milestone, I won't feel insecure anymore. I won't feel unworthy anymore. My soul won't ache anymore. But it's a fallacy. Because when we arrive, we might get a high for 3-6 months, yeah, but ultimately what will happen is the desperation, the despair that we thought we were escaping will return again. Why? Because we cannot save ourselves. We cannot perform our way out of the depths of our despair. When we do, we just dig the despair deeper. And Jonah recognized this. He writes this in verse 6 in his prayer. He says, "To the roots of the mountain I sank down. The earth beneath me barred me in forever." He knew that he was not escaping this. He could try and perform his way out of the depths that he was in. He could try and put his foot on the accelerator full throttle. But he knew ultimately that there's no further I can go. I'm trapped. I need salvation from elsewhere. And so he writes this, "But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit." You brought my life out of the pit, God. We can't think, work, or behave our way out. We are truly incapable of saving ourselves. And the more we try and rescue ourselves, the deeper we sink. But the good news is, grace begins where our self-sufficiency ends. Grace begins where our self-sufficiency ends. Because we are sinners who are incapable of saving ourselves, but we are saved through extreme and costly measures. Twice in his prayer, Jonah mentions the holy temple. In verse 4, he says, "I said, I have been banished from your sight, yet I will look again toward your holy temple." And then again in verse 7, he says, "When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple." His hope was in the temple because Jonah knew something that we often forget. See, in the temple is where the mercy comes at a cost. The mercy comes at a cost. It's where sin's dealt with. It's where blood is shed. It's where forgiveness is paid for. It's where mercy comes at cost. And Jonah knew that if he was going to get out of this pit of desperation, if he was going to get out of the depth of his despair, it was because someone was going to pay the cost. The mercy seat was how the Ark of the Covenant, which on this picture, it's the lid of the Ark of the Covenant. And on the Day of Atonement, the priest would come in with the blood of the sacrifice and sprinkle it upon the lid of the Ark of the Covenant, which was called the mercy seat. Theologically speaking, this is not just where sacrifice for Israel's sin were accepted, but the very place that mercy was made. This is its location. And so in Jonah referencing the holy temple, he's recognizing that if mercy is going to save me right now, it's going to come from that place. The place where God's presence meets his people at the mercy seat. The rejection of God in and through disobedience to him requires radical treatment if it is to be remedied. But the temple was always pointing forward. It was always pointing forward. In Romans 3, Paul writes this: God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. And the word in Greek there for atonement is this word that says, I think it sounds like this anyway. Speak to Jamie after for clarification. But it says this, hilasterios. And it literally means atonement cover. The place where my sins are forgiven. God put Jesus forward as the hilasterios, the true mercy seat. The place where justice and mercy meet in the spilling of blood. The place where mercy is made. And that's why in the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus says this. Some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, Teacher, We want to see a sign from you. And he answered, a wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be there 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Jesus, as Timothy Keller puts it, is the better Jonah. Jonah fled from the mission that God gave him. Jesus set his face towards Jerusalem. Jonah sinks under the weight of his own rebellion. Jesus sinks under the weight of our rebellion, taking upon himself our sin. Jonah's sacrifice saved a crew for a moment, whereas Jesus' sacrifice saves the world for eternity. And Jonah cried, you brought me my life out from the pit, where Jesus went into the pit to bring our lives up out of it forever. Our salvation took the descent of Jesus himself, the better Jonah. Through Jesus, God has saved us, despite our sin, at infinite cost to himself. Grace is not cheap. It cost Jesus his life. You see, we are sinners who are incapable of saving ourselves, but we are saved through extreme and costly measures. So returning to our question, how do the depths of our despair become the location of our deliverance? Well, Jonah's story, Jonah's prayer, is throughout Scripture. And it tells us that change begins with a cry. I cried out to the Lord in my great trouble, he writes in the first verse of his prayer, and he answered me. Deliverance begins when Jonah confesses from within the depths of his despair. As Timothy Keller puts it, that is the real deliverance, not the release from the fish. That Jonah cries out to the Lord in his despair, from the context of his depths of despair. James Montgomery Boyce, in his expositional commentary of Jonah, writes this: it is not when history is redirected by some supernatural event that the great miracles occur. It is when a person comes to acknowledge his or her sin and confesses it before God, and when, as a consequence, God restores the broken creator-creature relationship. I think if we want our places of despair to become the location of our deliverance, I think it requires us to do what Jonah did. I think it requires us to cry out and confess our sin from within the depths themselves. James, who's Jesus' brother, writes this in his letter: confess your sins to each other and pray for one another so that you may be healed. So that you may be healed from the depths of your despair. So that you might be saved. So as I come into land, I just want to suggest something for us. If we want to see lives transformed in this church by the grace of God, then I think we must become a church where the cries of his people can be expressed from within the depths of their despair. That's a requirement on us. to become that type of church. Luke Bretherton writes, he said this in a speech. He said, we are to listen for and to these cries if we are to foster faithful, loving, and hopeful forms of change where we live and work and have our being. We are to listen to them. Listen for them. And so if confession is going to be part of our life together, we need to understand what kind of community it actually takes to make confession a possibility. Because not every culture is a safe place to confess. See, to become a community where people can confess their sin and need for God to save them, we have to become a church community that is safe enough for anybody to confess anything, but strong enough to hold what's confessed responsibly. We have to become safe enough for anybody to be able to confess anything, but also strong enough to hold what is confessed responsibly. Before we talk about confession a bit more, I just want to be really clear. Grace does not erase consequences. It does change the way that we walk through those consequences, though. When Jonah cried out, God rescued him, but he also walked Jonah back into responsibility. He didn't go, oh, that's fine, Jonah, like, we're not going to go to Nineveh anymore. It's like, no, we're going back. And in the same way, if someone confesses something to us that puts them in danger, or they confess that they're in danger of themselves, we must adhere to safeguarding practice, which is not to punish, but to protect. And we have the wonderful Sue who's with us today. She's somewhere, maybe. Oh, there she is. Who's our safeguarding officer, and is amazing, and is both safe and strong. Let me tell you that publicly. But safeguarding isn't to punish, it's to protect. Safeguarding isn't an expectation. It is an expectation, but it's part of compassion. And it's how we share the weight of confession as a church community. But my sense is that in this season, Jesus is wanting us to become safe enough for anybody to confess anything, and strong enough that the confession's held responsibly, dealt with responsibly. And that brings us, it's the final thing that I'll introduce, I promise, to this framework that I've come up with. Now, frameworks can be clever and, arty-farty, and fine, but this isn't the answer, right? This framework will cause us to have way more questions than it does solutions, okay? I'm fully aware of that. So see it as a compass, right, that's going to try and direct us from the depths of the forests that I once found myself in to the safety of my car in the car park. It's a compass. And it's actually, I've kind of stolen this framework from something called radical candor, which is about how we give and receive feedback in the workplace. I'm looking at my sister who's an HR consultant, and she's like nodding. So she's aware of it. But not aware of this one, which is one I've rewritten based on that. You can see on the X and Y axis, you've got I failed at maths. The one that's vertical, safe and unsafe. Safe is at the top, unsafe is at the bottom. On the horizontal one, you've got strong on the right of the screen, weak on the left. And the idea is that each quadrant recognizes and labels the type of community we are. If, for example, we're strong but unsafe, or if we're weak and unsafe. And the idea is that we'll work clockwise around it and reveal the best scenario. So the first section is when we are unsafe and strong. And this is what I've called obnoxious exposure. And it's what happens when someone confesses, but it's met with severity or shame or judgment. It sounds harsh, feels intimidating, it's punitive, it's ultimately unsafe. And this ultimately is a fearful community. And if we're a fearful community, we're likely to not confess our sin because we're fearful of the consequences. We might be weak and unsafe, which I've labelled manipulative hiddenness. So what happens when a community is neither safe nor strong, really? It's a culture of secrecy, gossip, avoidance. No one feels safe confessing anything because they're not quite sure if it's going to be held safely. Will what I confess get to the wrong people? Can I trust this person to hold this confidentially? And so what happens is within an unsafe and weak community, it becomes closed. And secrets end up growing in the dark because vulnerability feels dangerous and everyone manages appearances instead of telling the truth. But sometimes we are safe as a community, but we're also weak. And this is what I've called ruinous mercy. It's what happens when we create warm, gentle environments, but we refuse to hold what's confessed with any strength, clarity, or responsibility. We hear the confession of someone's sin, and ultimately what we end up doing is going, there. And we don't really walk with them through the consequences. We comfort them, but perhaps the challenge isn't there. And this becomes a comforting community, which sounds nice. Because we can almost say anything, but nothing really changes. No one's willing to carry the truth with me towards the actions that I know I need to take. And so finally, what does it look like then to be a safe and a strong community? What does it look like to be safe enough for anybody to confess anything, but strong enough that those confessions are held responsibly? Well, I've called this radical confession. It's where honesty and healing meet. It's when someone brings something into the light and is met with compassion and accountability. It's confession that's received with grace, courage, safeguarding, and truth. And it's not minimized, and neither is it weaponized. It's kind, it's courageous, it's protective, it's transforming. It is safe enough for anybody to confess anything, and it is strong enough to hold what's confessed responsibly. Now, my experience of being in this church from when I was in my early 20s is that I've experienced glimpses of us being a community of radical confession, where the sin that I confessed into the safety of people that I trusted was held both with seriousness but compassion. I don't know what it means for your life groups, if we have those. I don't know where you might put yourself on that. I don't know where you'd put yourself personally on that. I don't know if you know anybody who's safe and strong. But today isn't about a few people confessing something. That is important, yes, but I just want us to focus on the reality that all of us, it takes all of us to become this kind of community where confession can flourish, where it is safe enough for anybody to confess anything, and strong enough to hold what's confessed responsibly. And as we begin our prayer ministry today, it might be that for you, the first step is like, Lord, make me the kind of person that is safe and strong. Because I know I'm a sinner that's incapable of saving myself, but I'm saved by you at extreme measures. And I want to be the gospel with hands and feet, the people that I walk and talk and live with. So Lord, make me into somebody that can receive and walk in radical confession. Or actually it might be that you need to ask God for the courage to bring to light that which you have been walking in dark with to somebody that you know is safe and strong. Because it still takes courage to cry out from the depths of your despair. It is not easy. It will hurt like hell. It will feel rotten. It will feel like the worst thing to do when the best thing that you think is to push the accelerator on the pedal. You have a choice. But healing comes when we get a grip of grace. And in doing so through confession, we allow grace to the grip on us. Either way, this moment of prayer ministry that we're about to have isn't the end. It's not like, oh yeah, we've prayed for people, now we've done it. We are strong and safe. No, it's a journey. It takes ages to create this kind of culture. Like I've said, this poses way more questions